Hello everyone and welcome to today's class. Today we're going to be working on another design, okay, and I'm going to show you what the design looks like. Okay, so you could call this an asymmetric design, right, with an overlap, right? And I'm going to be showing you, we are going to be using a full front trouser block. So I'm going to show you how to create one, and then we'll move on to creating this particular design. To create a full front trouser block, what you'll be needing obviously two front trouser block, right? You're going to flip one to the other side and then place it like so, such that the CF touches and matches, right? And then you're going to paste that in place. Now don't worry about this is just the crotch extension, okay? So don't worry about that. Don't worry about the overlap you have here. It is totally fine. What you want to guard against, or what you want to ensure, is that your CF touches and is well aligned and does not overlap. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paste this in place and then we'll take it from there, right? Okay, so now I've pasted it, so you can safely say that we have a full trouser block. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the design one more time, okay, and then let's see. Okay, now I want you to take note of where it starts from. Okay, so it starts from the side waist, right, and crosses over and ends somewhere below the crotch level. Okay, so we can rightly say this point here is somewhere around let's say 1 to maybe 1.5 to as much as 2 inches below the crotch level, right? Okay, and then the waistband for the overlap is highlighted on the pattern, and then where this let's call it an overlap begins from is about, you can say, if this is the crotch line, okay, which is your CF line, you can measure we can safely say perhaps 1.5 to about 2 inches again away from the crotch line. Okay, now these are all guidelines that you can always play around with, and then you draw your style line like so, making sure, now if you take note of this part here, I would safely assume that it ends on the grain line. This edge here of the overlap ends on the grain line, so you want to make sure that when you are drawing this, you draw it to meet the grain line at the end, and then you create an extension, okay, because you can see that it's quite longer. The overlap here is longer than the basic trouser pattern. Okay, so you create that extension and then you finish it up, right? And obviously you can, on the basic trouser pattern, you can carry out the necessary modifications you want. If you want it tight fitted or all that, you'd have done that before creating your trouser block, your full front trouser block. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste a piece of paper underneath, right, because we want to draw our style lines in place. Okay, so what I've done is to place my mark where I want it, okay, and then place the other mark here. Okay, so what I also did was to extend my center front line, right? Remember where I pasted it, I extended it downward with the aid, now this is it right here, I extended it downward with the aid of a set square, okay, and that's it as the broken line. Okay, so the broken line is going to serve as my guideline when I'm about to plan this other part here. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you want to connect this point to this point. Okay, if you want it straight, you can use your straight ruler, but I think in the picture it's slightly curved. Okay, it's slightly curved, so you can use the almost straight part of your hip curve. I'm using my French curve because I'm working on a quarter scale pattern. All right, so the next thing we want to do next is to plan the width of our band, because there's also a band on here. Okay, it also has its own waistband, and of course that's not a big deal. Just use the same waistband, the same width. You can choose to use the same width of your waistband. Now notice that I haven't cut out my waistband yet, because this waistband starts from the side waist on here. Okay, so we first of all plan our design, our style lines, then we trace before we start cutting out the waistband. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to measure downward, okay, parallel to this line. I'm going to measure downward parallel to this line, the width of my waistband. Okay, so my waistband is in place, right? My waistband has been drawn in place. So the next thing I did was to measure from this broken line here 2 inches outward, which is my mark right here. So I'm going to draw a line touching this line, passing through this mark, touching the end of the waistband, and ending it at my grain line on here. Okay, so I'm going to be using, you're going to be needing your hip curve to do that. Okay, so let's draw that line in place. Okay, so that's my line drawn in place. Okay, that's it right here, ending it at the grain line at the hem. Now you can decide to make it slightly more curvier if that's what you intend to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to bring down my grain line. Okay, now remember that we had an extension. Let me just show you once again. Remember there's an extension here. Okay, so you're just going to bring it down at the grain line by how much of an extension you want. Okay, just note that if you're going to be working with this type of extension, then you might want to perhaps shorten the length of your trouser to maybe like the capri pants level. Okay, so that your extension doesn't start touching the floor. Okay, so I've extended it. Now this is just a guideline. You can make it as long or as short as you want. Okay, and that's it right there. Now if you have an angle right here, just blend that angle in. Okay, and that's basically it. What you want to do next is you're just going to trace. Let me show you where you're going to trace. So you first of all start tracing here, right? Trace this part, right? Trace on this line all the way to the side, right? Trace on here, trace all the way down to this point, trace this point, and then trace your side seam all the way back to your side front, your side waist. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do in a bit. Okay, so before I trace, it has a patch pocket. All right, so you can also, sorry about that, you can also plan your patch pocket. Okay, just making use of guidelines. Okay, now you can see that the end of the depth of the patch pocket. Now most times patch pockets are usually about 6 inches deep. Okay, so I would estimate that from here to here is about 6 inches. All right, and then if you were to square this straight out, this sharp corner here will be about 1 inch or 1.5, at most 1 inch. I'm going to stick with 1 inch. That is, if you square this straight out, this depth on here will be about 1 inch, right? And then you can see that you can safely assume that this end of the patch pocket lies on the crotch line. You can safely assume that this end of the patch pocket lies on the crotch line. All right, and then you measure at a diagonal 5.5 inches to as much as 6 inches if you want, and then bring it back to meet the side seam. Okay, so I'm not going to be planning the patch pockets on this, but if you want your patch pocket, just follow the guidelines I used, draw it on it, and then you're also going to trace the patch pockets as well. So let's move on. Okay, so I'm done tracing, Okay, so you might want to place a balance mark here, okay, so that when you are sewing this overlap on, you know exactly where this point has to be sewn to, right? So you might want to place a balance mark here that will be on the other panel of your front trouser. And that's the traced copy, so I'm going to cut it out. I'm just going to cut it out. Okay, so this is our overlap. Right now, yeah, you are still going to need to cut out the band. Okay, so you might want to place balance marks as well. You're going to need to cut out the band, right, because you are going to sew it back into the lower piece. Now all your seam allowances remain in place. Okay, so whatever seam allowance you use on your main trouser panel, you use the same allowance at the side seam. Okay, at this point here, you just need a seam allowance of about ½ inch max. Right now, remember that you are cutting this off, you're cutting your waistband off. Okay, so you're going to need, now at this end here, this edge, remember this edge goes into the other side seam, so whatever seam allowance you use on the side seam, you also need to add here. Apart from that, ½ inch up here and ½ inch underneath your waistband is absolutely fine, and that's it. So that's it. And then you might want to play around with fabric, contrast colors. All right, and that's it right there. This is what your pattern would look like once it is sewn. Pretty simple, isn't it? All you have left to do is to sew your patch pockets if you want one, and your belt loops. Okay, and that's it.